The Lausanne and Brussels Diamond League just passed with some excellent distance races. We saw the 800 meter Olympic and world champions square off again, another dominant win by Keely Hodgkinson, and a massive upset in the men's 5000 meter. But before all that, we are going to start off with what else but the men's 1500 meter, which saw another stacked field with Jared Ngus, Niels Laros and Faneuil Koch being the main contenders. Ngus was continuing his campaign to qualify for the world champs via winning the Diamond League final. Koch was returning to the track to see if he can cement himself as a mainstay contender going into Tokyo, and Laros was featuring in his second Diamond League of the season after his comeback win in the Bowerman Mile. Also in the mix were Hobbs Kessler, Jake Whiteman, Reynald Chariot and Isaac Nada, amongst a large 18-man field. The race began with Koch assuming his preferred position, sitting on the leader behind the pacers and Laros following suit behind him. Ngus, interestingly, started off near the back of the pack but would make his way up the field by the third lap. And once the final pacer dropped out with 500 to go, Koch would take the lead, inadvertently cutting off compatriot Abel Kipsang, who fell into the infield. The Kenyan began leading an extended charge for home, but Laros was tracking him closely, with Ngus and Kessler also being right there with the leaders. With 150 to go, Laros changes gears and starts moving around Koch. His lead only grows in the home straight, where he claims victory in a 3:30.58 with a 12.5 last 100. Koch finished second, with Ngus taking the third spot and confirming his place in the final. But that was absolute blistering pace by the Dutchman, and not a slow race by any means. And for many, this is the race that has cemented him even as a gold medal favourite for Tokyo. Now, I was previously hesitant to jump on the Laros hype train after Eugene, and at the time I thought calling Laros a serious medal contender was maybe a bit of a stretch, given that 5 guys had run 3:27 by that point. But this win in Brussels has made me shift that opinion for several reasons. For one, it shows that Eugene was no fluke. Laros can consistently close hard in pretty quick races. For another, Ngus seems to be less of a medal threat than he was earlier in the season, which gives Laros one less person to worry about. Though we obviously shouldn't discount Ngus just yet. For me though, the biggest positive change for Laros medal chances is that it now seems unlikely Ingebrigtsen will return to Tokyo with full fitness, if he even competes at all. As a result, the World Champs final is less likely to be as brutally fast as the Olympic one was. We don't really have a designated frontrunner anymore. Ngus does not have the form or ability to do so, and I just can't see Jakob trying to aggressively lead given his injury issues. I feel like the World Champs final is shaping up to be more of a 3:28-3:29 race, as whilst Kerr and Hocker could try and push the pace in the third and fourth lap, they are unlikely to try and grind out 55-second laps right from the start. My main question after the Bowerman Mile was, does Laros' speed translate to a super fast race? But now that it seems less likely the final will be super fast, I like Laros' chances a lot, as that lethal 100 meter kick he has will really suit that type of race. I wouldn't count on the speed if the race does end up being in the 3:27s, but based on his PB and this year's form, I can see him at least preserving that speed to a 3:28 run. Still, even a bronze medal will be a tough task given the sheer depth of the 1500 meter. Kerr and Hocker have looked solid all season and will likely peak for the World Championships as well. Jonah Koch dropped a 12.49 last 100 in the USA Trials, which he won in 3:30.17. Though his 200 meter was slower overall. And although Laros beat them today, Ngus and Faneuil Koch cannot be counted out. I will hold my hands up and eat my words since my last video, as I definitely think Laros is a serious medal contender, but I still hesitate to go as far as saying he is the gold medal favourite. Interestingly, he was hesitant to reveal what events he's entered for Tokyo, implying that he may be doing more than just the 1500 meter. He took a double gold in the 800 and 5000 meters in the Euro Under-23 champs, and does have the standard for the 800. That said, I like his chances in the 5000 meter much more, as he hasn't broken 144 in the 800 and would probably need a solid PB to even qualify for the final in Tokyo. However, he doesn't have the standard in the 5k and is ranked 42nd in the world, which I think just makes it possible for him to qualify by world rankings, but I won't pretend to understand how this works in detail. Since the 5000 meter is probably the least deep of all these events, and Laros' 1500 meter speed will really help him in a championship style 5k, I do like his chances in that discipline. Maybe I'm massively overthinking stuff, but I just don't see why he'd be coy about revealing his entries for Tokyo unless he was doing multiple events. I still hesitate to say he's the favourite for the 1500 meter as some have suggested, because I think the event is just too deep and volatile for anyone to be a solid favourite. But he is now undoubtedly up there as one of the strongest contenders. As for Faneuil Koch, we have seen that he maybe does not thrive in quick sprints or leading the pack, and is instead best suited to sitting on the leader and pressuring them down the back straight for a more extended kick, similar to Josh Kerr. I still think he's a big medal threat, especially because his style suits a 3:28 to 3:29 race, where the strength is also pretty important. It was still a solid performance by him, and the split showed that Laros opening the gap in the final 100 was much more due to Laros speeding up than Koch slowing down, but for him to thrive the most in World Champs, he needs to bet on a Kerr or Ngus striking out with 600 to go so he can follow them and make his move in the last 300. And to be honest, this was the main distance race in Brussels. Agnes Singetic attempted a 5,000 meter world record, but she was never really on target pace and fell off pretty badly in the last mile. Nikki Hiltz also claimed a solid win in the women's 1500, but the field did not have any of the heavy hitters after Welteji pulled out due to injury concerns. We therefore move on to the Lausanne Diamond League, beginning with the men's 800 meter, where we were treated to our fourth showdown of the season between Marco Arap and Emmanuel Wanyonyi. Currently, the 2025 score between them is 2-1, with Arap having an early win in the Grand Slam Kingston meet and Wanyonyi claiming 2 Diamond League victories in Monaco and London. Throughout their career, the score is 9-6 to Wanyonyi, although Arap claimed most of those wins when Wanyonyi was still a teenager. The rest of the field was also stacked, with the likes of Hoppel, Hoey and many others. Hoey in particular needed points to qualify for the Diamond League final in order to compete for the World Championships qualifying spot after his 4th place in the USA Trials. Although the Wavelights were sat at world record pace, the monsoon rains in Lausanne made it unlikely that anyone would run that time. The race started off with Wanyonyi assuming his usual lead position, with Britain's Max Bergen, fresh off a 1:42 PB in the London Diamond League, sitting right behind him. Arap and Hoey were also close to the Kenyan, ready to strike when the time was right. Despite the weather, Wanyonyi still ran the first lap in 49.9 seconds, with Bergen aggressively tracking him. Hoey sat off this pace slightly though, and Arap had let a real gap form through the first lap. At this point, I felt Arap was in a good position to mount an assault in the last 150, as Wanyonyi would presumably tire after going out so hard in such poor conditions. Sure enough, the Canadian made his usual big move around the 300 meter mark, overtaking Wanyonyi down the back straight. Bergen sits on the shoulder of Arap looking strong, with Hoey and Wanyonyi slotted behind. Despite the convincing move though, the Canadian was looking tired and faded badly in the last 100 meters, with Bergen following suit. Meanwhile though, Hoey was able to glide past the field and take home the victory in a very respectable 1:42.83. Wanyonyi fell behind but was able to fight back in the last 50 to claim a 2nd place, with Spain's Mohamed Attawi running another smart race to come 3rd. Arap unfortunately faded to 5th. Great win by Hoey, and ironically he was the person to capitalise on his opponents going out too fast in the first lap. He ran a pretty even race, which is what I think allowed him to come strong in the final 100. The same also applies with Attawi, who has shown himself to be consistently strong in the home straight. Hopefully this is a sign that Hoey has learned from USA's and is trying to preserve his energy for the Diamond League final. This race also reinforced my opinion that these days the 800 meter is run far too hard in the first lap, due to the perception that a 2-second positive split is the most efficient way to run the distance. Rudisha ran his world record with those splits, and many other top times have been run the same way. As a result, everyone seems to be trying to follow in his footsteps, but I just don't think that's the most efficient way to run the 800. I understand the first 200 is likely to be quick as everyone jostles for position and that will rub off on the 400 meter split, but a 2-second difference is massive, especially as it's often closer to 3 seconds, with Wanyonyi running a 53.3 second last lap. I plan on making a full video dissecting this idea in detail, but I really think the 800 guys are shooting themselves in the foot by going out so aggressively in the first lap. Arap unfortunately seems to be having some troubles with his fitness, as he ran a relatively strong race but just had nothing in the home straight. He held back smartly in the first half, and although his move down the back straight was aggressive, I don't think it was extreme enough to justify him gassing out that badly without other factors being at play. We should remember that he has run 1:41.2 at his best, but he seems unable to show us that side of him as of right now. I know the conditions were horrible, but the Canadian hasn't really been close to running sub 1:42 this season, which is not ideal given how strong Wanyonyi looks. In fairness, Arap's fastest 800 going into Paris was a 1:42.93, but the Olympics were held 6 weeks earlier than this year's World Champs, and that was run before Arap began taking bicarb, which seems to be the key to these fast 800 times. I'm not panicking just yet, but I am a little concerned about his fitness, especially since he was referencing injury issues in his post-race interview in London. Masalela also had a weak finish in this field, and it may be a classic case of him peaking too early in the season. Again, he may pull out something strong in Tokyo, but given that he was running 1:42s in May, his season doesn't seem to be living up to the initial promise. Moving on to the men's 5,000 meter, which had another stacked field. For me, this was a big showdown between the Americans and the Ethiopians. On the Ethiopian side, the top runners were Telehun Bekele and Hagos Gebret, whilst the Americans had Grant Fisher and Graham Blanks. There were several other sub 1250 runners in the mix, so it would be interesting to see who came out on top. Of course, the heavy rains made everyone disinterested in the 12:44 world leading pace lights, so once the lights pulled away a few laps in, everyone began to settle into a tactical race. Despite the commentators' critiques, Fisher was able to put himself in a strong position in the last 400 behind former 1500 meter prodigy Samuel Tefera. With 250 to go, Gebret launched his usual aggressive push for home, but was unable to open up any real gap. As they come round the bend, Belgium's Isaac Kimeli swings round Grant Fisher to take the lead and pulls away from the field. And despite Fisher's best efforts, Kimeli is able to gap the field to win in a 13:07 after a ridiculous 25.4 last 200 with a 12.6 final 100. Fisher had the best kick after that and only managed a 13.1 final 100. For the others, Gebret once again gassed quickly after his kick and finished 7th. Graham Blanks came 8th after a rough last lap, and Keely unfortunately DNF'd near the end of this race. Obviously the weather conditions made this 5k much more volatile, but the main question people have took away from it is, who is Isaac Kimeli? Looking at his World Athletics page, he has been a solid distance runner in the European scene with a 12:56 PB for the 5k and a 27:07 for the 10k. He does also like to compete in cross country over the winter, which could explain his performance in these conditions. Though granted, he has never been a serious contender in the discipline. That's the only explanation I can really give for his super fast finish at the end, especially because it wasn't a super tactical race given Kimeli's personal best is barely sub 13, and the Belgian doesn't have any serious history in the shorter distances either. Don't get me wrong, he's definitely a solid runner on the European scene, and he's not a new name if you've been watching the European Championships for the last few years, but he hasn't ever been a standout athlete in any major competition either. Nonetheless, it's a good win by him, and with the tactical nature of the 5,000 meters, I do wonder what he can pull off in the future. For Grant Fisher, it's still a reasonable performance given how the weather seemed to take a toll on everyone. I still think he has yet to really have a standout race on the outdoor circuit this season. Of course, he ran 12:44 indoors, but his races have either been overshadowed by the likes of Nico Young or have been caveated by their lack of real competition. He has beat Bekele and Gebret multiple times in Grand Slam, but neither athlete is having the best season, and the incredibly tactical nature of these races does put an asterisk on them for me, especially since neither of the Ethiopians are known to be strong kickers. He is still one of the best and most consistent 5k runners on the scene right now, but given that he is going to be eyeing up the gold medal in Tokyo, I think he'd want a big win before World Championships to really inspire confidence that he can beat Nico Young and Jakob Ingebrigtsen if indeed the Norwegian is able to compete. Kind of similar to what I said about Arup earlier. His season hasn't been bad by any means, but for a gold medal contender, you'd maybe want to see a bit better. On to the women's side, which had a great 800 meter field, with the headliner of course being Britain's Keely Hodgkinson, fresh off her 154 season opener in the Silesia Diamond League. Challenging her would be compatriot Georgia Hunter-Bell, former world champion Prudence Segediso, American prodigy Addie Wiley, and Botswanan runner Uratile Nawi, fresh off a 156 PB in Silesia. Despite this being a pretty strong field, Keely was the heavy favourite for obvious reasons. And just like in Silesia, she took the lead early in the race and did not relinquish it for the rest of the run. She went through 400 in bang on 56 seconds and opened up a gap with 300 to go. Hunter-Bell, despite having the second fastest PB, was falling behind. Hodgkinson maintained her gap on the field and pushed home to 155. Yes, a second slower than her Silesia time, but given that she'd run fast a few days earlier and the conditions of this meet, it's still super impressive, and it shows that her season opener was no fluke. Again though, I have to wonder why she insisted on opening in a 56-second first lap, rather than something a bit more evenly paced. To a certain extent, I understand the men's side doing it, as getting out hard to establish your position is smart, and there's a very real risk of being trapped behind a sea of bodies if you don't commit early. But Hodgkinson was levels above everyone in the field, and it's pretty likely that everyone's plan was stick behind Keely and try to hold on. So she doesn't need to worry about establishing her position as much as the men do, because she has much more respect from the rest of the field. Maybe I'm missing something about this 2-second differential, but it is regardless a great run by the Brits. She further reinforces her strong position going into Worlds, and it really looks like the gold medal is hers to lose. As a final side note for the Lausanne Diamond League, the interviews that came out from Runnerspace were just... they were something else, man, honestly. The interviewer clearly had no idea who these athletes are, and I wouldn't be surprised if he just doesn't watch athletics to begin with. He seemed to think Marco Arup was American, didn't know who Jaroslava Mahuchek was, and was asking the most generic, frankly childish questions over and over again.
What's your favorite position in the 4x1, basically? 4x100. With the conditions and everything, how things went for you today? And like, what's your favorite thing about Diamond League, basically? You know, what do you love about, or what do you really like about Diamond League in general terms? And what about the Worlds in Tokyo? You know, I mean,
I didn't make the World team.
You didn't make? Oh, sorry about that. Okay, you know, how's the road to trying to win the Diamond League in an event? You know, how does that road look like?
Yeah, it really baffles me how he managed to get through, given how guarded the Diamond League can be with their media accreditation. I don't know if Runnerspace unfairly put this guy on the spot, or if he was planned to interview them from the start, but either way, it's comically incompetent from them. Regardless, thank you very much for watching the video, let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one. Happy training.